What if I told you there was a prophet who parted rivers, multiplied food, raised the dead, and even made an iron axe head float? Elisha was no ordinary man. He was a prophet who walked in God's power and performed miracles that defied all logic. In this video, we'll uncover the incredible life of Elisha, his fearless faith, and how his story can transform your understanding of God's miracles today. Elisha's life wasn't just about supernatural power, it was about unwavering trust in God and obedience to his calling. As we explore his most astonishing miracles, you'll discover how faith can unlock divine intervention in your own life. This video will inspire you to believe in the impossible and walk in the confidence that God is still at work today. If you're ready to dive into the story of Elisha and his extraordinary miracles, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's share this powerful message and encourage others to grow in their faith. Now, let's begin the journey of the prophet who defied the impossible. Elisha's calling as a prophet began in a very significant way. In 1 Kings 19 verses 19 to 21, we see that God instructed Elijah to find Elisha and anoint him as his successor. When Elijah found Elisha, he was plowing a field, and Elijah cast his mantle over him, symbolizing that Elisha was chosen by God to follow in his footsteps. This moment marked the beginning of Elisha's prophetic journey. The mantle represented the transfer of God's calling and power, setting Elisha apart to carry out God's mission. Elisha responded by leaving everything behind, including his family and work, to follow Elijah. This was a bold decision, showing Elisha's commitment to God's calling. The relationship between Elijah and Elisha was not just a mentor-mentee relationship. It was a deep and spiritual connection that was vital for Elisha's growth as a prophet. Elijah mentored Elisha for several years, guiding him and teaching him how to hear from God and serve his people. Elisha watched Elijah perform miracles and experienced firsthand the challenges that came with being a prophet. This time of discipleship was crucial in shaping Elisha's ministry. Elijah's example of obedience and faithfulness to God provided a strong foundation for Elisha, and Elisha learned the importance of remaining humble and fully dependent on God's strength. As Elijah's time on earth was coming to an end, Elisha's faithfulness and commitment were tested. In 2 Kings 2 verses 9 to 14, just before Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. This was not a request for more power for personal gain, but rather a desire to carry on Elijah's prophetic ministry with the same strength and anointing. Elijah responded that if Elisha saw him being taken away, his request would be granted. Elisha remained steadfast and witnessed Elijah's ascension, and God honored his request by granting him the spirit of Elijah in a double portion. The transfer of prophetic power was an important moment in Elisha's life. As Elijah was taken to heaven, Elisha picked up Elijah's mantle, symbolizing the continuation of the prophetic ministry. Elisha immediately put the mantle to use, performing his first miracle by parting the Jordan River, just as Elijah had done. This moment was a confirmation that God had indeed given Elisha the authority to continue the work that Elijah had started. Elisha's request for a double portion was not just about receiving power, but about being faithful to the calling God had placed on his life. Elisha's success as a prophet can be directly traced back to his unwavering commitment to follow Elijah and his request for a double portion of the prophetic spirit. The boldness of his request shows how deeply Elisha desired to carry out God's will and serve his people. Elisha knew that the task ahead would be difficult, but he trusted that God would equip him for the challenge. His request was granted, and Elisha went on to perform even more miracles than Elijah, showing how God's power works through those who are faithful and willing to serve. Elisha's calling as a prophet was marked by a moment of divine appointment, a deep relationship with Elijah, and a bold request for the power to continue the work that Elijah had started. Elisha's journey shows the importance of discipleship, faithfulness, and the desire to serve God with all one's heart. His story teaches us that when we are faithful to God's calling, He will equip us with everything we need to accomplish His will. Elisha's legacy reminds us that God is always faithful to those who follow Him, empowering them to do great things for His glory. One of the most powerful miracles performed by Elisha was the multiplication of oil for a poor widow in 2 Kings 4 verses 1 to 7. The widow had lost her husband and was in debt, with creditors threatening to take her sons as slaves. In desperation, she turned to Elisha for help. He instructed her to gather as many empty jars as she could and fill them with the little oil she had left. Miraculously, the oil kept flowing until all the jars were filled. This miracle demonstrated God's incredible ability to provide even in the most desperate of situations. Through Elisha's obedience and faith, God not only saved the widow from her troubles but also provided for her future by selling the oil to pay her debts. Elisha's miracles were not limited to providing for individuals. They also impacted entire communities. In 2 Kings 3 verses 16 to 20, Elisha performed another miracle in the desert to provide water for the Israeli army. The king of Israel and his allies were in the desert, running out of water and in desperate need of help. Elisha, by God's command, instructed them to dig ditches in the dry ground. The next morning, God sent water to fill the ditches, providing the army with the water they needed. This miracle not only showed God's provision but also demonstrated His power to intervene in the most hopeless situations. It reminded the Israelites that God could bring life-giving water even in the driest of places. Another significant miracle in Elisha's ministry was the healing of Naaman, a commander from Syria, who suffered from leprosy, 2 Kings 5 verses 1 to 14. Naaman had heard of Elisha's healing powers and traveled from Syria to Israel in hopes of being cured. Elisha initially did not meet with Naaman personally, but sent a messenger to instruct him to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. At first, Naaman was offended and reluctant to follow such a simple instruction, thinking that the healing would require something more dramatic. However, after his servants convinced him, Naaman obeyed, and his leprosy was miraculously healed. This story teaches us the importance of obedience and humility. Naaman's healing came not through grand gestures but through simple, obedient faith in God's instructions. The miracle of Naaman's healing also emphasizes God's grace and the fact that His power is not limited to Israel alone. Although Naaman was a foreigner, God's love and healing extended to him. This reflects the broader message that God's grace is available to all who seek it, no matter their background or nationality. Elisha's actions showed that God's miracles are not reserved for the Israelites but are available to anyone who comes with a heart of faith and humility. These miracles performed by Elisha reveal God's power to provide, restore, and heal in ways that defy human understanding. Whether it was providing oil for a widow, bringing water to a thirsty army, or healing a foreign commander, Elisha was a vessel through which God demonstrated His mercy, power, and faithfulness. Elisha's obedience to God allowed him to be an instrument of God's miraculous works, and these acts serve as a reminder that when we trust in God, He can do the impossible. The miracles of Elisha show that God is present and powerful, able to provide for our needs, heal our diseases, and guide us through the most difficult situations. Each of these miracles not only addressed the immediate needs of the people involved, but also pointed to God's greater purpose and His ability to work in unexpected ways. Elisha's life is a powerful reminder that, through faith and obedience, God can use us to bring about His miraculous work in the world. Elisha's ministry was full of miracles that demonstrated God's power to defy what seemed impossible. One such miracle is found in 2 Kings 4 verses 42 to 44, where Elisha multiplied a small amount of food to feed a large crowd. A man brought Elisha 20 loaves of barley and some grain, which seemed insufficient to feed 100 people. Elisha, however, instructed the servant to give it to the people. When they obeyed, the food miraculously multiplied, and everyone was fed with leftovers. This miracle showed that with God, even the smallest provision can meet the greatest needs. Elisha's faith and obedience allowed God to do the impossible, teaching us that nothing is too small for God to use and nothing is too great for God to accomplish. Another remarkable miracle performed by Elisha was when he made an iron axe head float on the water in 2 Kings 6 verses 1 to 7. The story begins with a group of prophets working near the Jordan River, and one of them accidentally dropped an axe head into the water. Distressed because the axe was borrowed, the man turned to Elisha for help. Elisha threw a stick into the water, and the axe head miraculously floated to the surface. This seemingly simple miracle revealed God's authority over the laws of nature. It showed that God has control over all things, even the most natural elements, and that nothing is beyond his reach. This miracle reminds us that God cares about even the smallest details of our lives. Elisha's ability to defy the impossible was not just about miracles of provision or physical laws. It extended to his ability to see and intervene in spiritual battles. In 2 Kings 6 verses 8 to 23, Elisha was involved in a supernatural confrontation with the Syrian army. The king of Syria sent an army to capture Elisha, but Elisha's servant was frightened when he saw the massive enemy forces surrounding them. Elisha, however, remained calm and prayed for God to open his servant's eyes. When God did, the servant saw that the hills were full of horses and chariots of fire, an army of angels surrounding them. Elisha then prayed for God to blind the enemy soldiers, which God did. Elisha then led the blinded soldiers to the king of Israel, where they were treated with mercy. This miracle not only spared Elisha but also showed God's power to intervene in battles and protect his people in ways that are beyond human understanding. Through these miracles, Elisha demonstrated that God's power is not limited by human expectations or natural laws. Whether it was feeding a multitude with a small offering, making iron float, or blinding an army, Elisha showed that God can intervene in any situation. These miracles were not just acts of wonder, but powerful reminders that God is in control, no matter the circumstances. They reveal that God's solutions are often surprising, challenging our limited understanding of what is possible. The miracles of Elisha also highlight the importance of obedience and faith in God's power. Elisha didn't question how God would work. He simply obeyed, trusting in God's ability to do the impossible. His life teaches us that when we trust God, we can witness his miraculous work in our lives. Whether we face financial struggles, health issues, or spiritual battles, we can have faith that God is able to intervene and change the course of events, even when it seems beyond our ability or understanding. Elisha's ministry was a testimony to the limitless power of God. From multiplying food to defying the laws of nature and winning spiritual battles, Elisha demonstrated that nothing is impossible for God. His miracles remind us to trust in God's power and to have faith that he can work wonders, even in situations that seem hopeless. Just as Elisha trusted God to handle the impossible, we too can place our faith in God, knowing that he is always able to do what seems beyond our grasp. Elisha's legacy is marked by his unwavering faith and courage. Throughout his ministry, he demonstrated an incredible trust in God's power, even when facing the most daunting challenges. Whether it was performing miracles in the face of opposition or standing firm in his calling despite rejection, Elisha showed us what it means to have faith in God's ability to intervene in impossible situations. His courage to obey God, even when it meant going against the grain or facing ridicule, teaches us the importance of standing firm in our faith, no matter the circumstances. Elisha's life reminds us that with God, nothing is impossible, and true faith involves trusting in his plan, even when we can't see the outcome. Elisha's example of obedience and humility is another important aspect of his legacy. Unlike many who seek personal glory or recognition, Elisha remained focused on serving God and fulfilling the mission given to him. He didn't seek the spotlight but quietly and faithfully carried out his duties as a prophet. His willingness to follow God's instructions, even when they didn't align with his own desires or understanding, shows the depth of his obedience. Elisha didn't let pride or self-interest cloud his purpose. His humility allowed him to be used by God in powerful ways, and his life challenges us to seek God's glory, not our own. What's particularly striking about Elisha's ministry is how he continued the work that his mentor, Elijah, had begun. Elisha's life was not about making a name for himself, but about continuing God's work through miracles and acts of faith. After Elijah's departure, Elisha stepped into the role of prophet and continued to show the people of Israel that God was still at work among them. He performed many miracles, including healing, providing for the needy, and guiding the nation in their spiritual journey. These miracles were not just acts of kindness, They were signs that God's power was still active, even in difficult times. Elisha's miracles proved that God's supernatural power didn't end with Elijah's ministry, and that he was still deeply involved with his people. Elisha's willingness to step into the shoes of Elijah and carry on his work shows the importance of succession and continuity in God's plans. Just as Elijah had passed on the mantle of prophetic leadership, Elisha continued to walk in obedience, passing on the message of God to the people. His life was a bridge between the earlier prophets and the future restoration of Israel. By continuing to perform miracles and speak God's word, Elisha ensured that God's power and presence remained known to his people. His legacy is one of continuity, reminding us that God's work is ongoing, and he uses faithful individuals to carry on his mission generation after generation. The power of God, displayed through Elisha's miracles, serves as a reminder that God is always at work, even when it seems like things are falling apart. Elisha's actions demonstrated that God's supernatural power was available to his people, no matter the challenges they faced. Through Elisha's obedience, humility, and faith, God continued to work in extraordinary ways. Elisha's life shows us that God's power is not limited to one person or one generation, but flows through those who are willing to serve as instruments of his will. Elisha's legacy points us to the fact that God's intervention is ongoing, and he continues to work miracles through his faithful servants. Elisha's legacy is one of faith, obedience, humility, and the continuation of God's miraculous work. His courage in the face of adversity, his steadfast faith in God's power, and his humility in serving others all serve as an example for us today. Elisha's life teaches us that no matter how impossible the situation, God is always able to intervene. As we reflect on his legacy, we are reminded to trust in God's plan, stay obedient to his calling, and live with the confidence that God can work through us, just as he worked through Elisha. In conclusion, the life of Elisha stands as a powerful testament to God's ability to defy the impossible. From multiplying food to making an iron axe head float, Elisha consistently relied on God's power to perform miracles that no human could accomplish on their own. His faith in God's intervention, even in the most difficult and unlikely circumstances, was unshakable. Elisha was not just a prophet who performed miracles. He was a man who lived a life of obedience, humility, and trust in God's plan. His courage to stand firm in his faith and his willingness to obey God's calling, no matter the cost, are key aspects of his legacy. As we reflect on Elisha's life and the miracles he performed, we are challenged to consider how we can apply his unshakable faith in our own lives. When we face difficult situations or feel overwhelmed by challenges, we can look to Elisha as an example of trusting in God's power. Like Elisha, we are called to trust in God's ability to overcome the impossible. His life teaches us that we don't need to rely on our own strength or understanding, but can trust that God will provide the guidance and strength we need to face life's challenges. Elisha's unwavering faith invites us to reflect on how we approach our own struggles. Are we relying on God's power in moments of hardship? Do we trust that he can work in miraculous ways when everything seems impossible? Just as Elisha saw God work in powerful ways through his obedience, we too can experience God's intervention when we place our trust in him. Elisha's life encourages us to step out in faith, believing that with God, all things are possible. The key takeaway from Elisha's story is that God is always able to do the impossible. Through Elisha's miracles, we see that no problem is too great for God to handle. When we face obstacles in our own lives, we can remember that God is always with us, ready to intervene. Elisha's life reminds us that we should never limit what God can do, as he is always willing and able to make a way where there seems to be none. Elisha's journey was not just about performing miracles, it was about being a faithful servant of God. His life challenges us to be faithful and obedient, knowing that God can use us to accomplish his purposes in the world. Just as Elisha was used as an instrument of God's power, we too can be vessels through which God's power flows, accomplishing what seems impossible in our own lives and in the lives of others. If you found the life and miracles of Elisha inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.